In this video, I will demonstrate how you can find data for very particular data questions. The first question I'm going to look at is the question of which country across the world had the highest youth unemployment and perhaps the lowest youth unemployment before the pandemic started, so say in year 2019. So that's a very specific question. And we will, at the end of this video, also ask ChatGPT to answer this question, perhaps see how well it does. But in the first instance, we'll do the hard work. We're actually going to identify the data source and actually look at the actual data and try to answer the question. So if you're new to this sort of data detective work, which it really is, the first hurdle you will possibly come across is where could these, is the question, to answer the question, where could these data possibly be? Now that's perfectly understandable. So you will find a bunch of places where you can find listed a whole range of different institutions that provide data to users across the world. One of these pages you can find on the Eclair homepage. That's a page to support econometric computing, created for students at the University of Manchester, but available for others. You can see the URL here, and that page has a list, has a section called datasets, and in here you can find a whole list of places where you can find data, and that is really only scratching the surface. There's a section here on international and statistical institutions, and that's possibly the best place to look for potential institutions that may have data for a range of countries across the world. And perhaps the first place to look at here, quite naturally, would be the World Bank. It has world in the name already. It's an institution for basically all countries around the world. So if they collect data, they most likely collect data for most countries in the world. So let's see what they have on offer. You can click here, you get to the World Bank. That already links to sort of the database for the World Bank. It has a nice little search box, so it says you could search for data type or a country. It seems to be exactly what we want, so we type in youth unemployment, and you see there's a bunch of indicators that come up. Okay, unemployment, youth, here unemployment, youth total. Okay, you could also get it by gender, so that looks pretty good. So let's click on this. And you get this sort of screen, and you can see here there are different series we may look at. You see a graph that looks pretty empty, but you see also at the bottom is sort of a table with information on different countries for different years. For instance, what the most recent year here is for certain countries. So let's look here on the right hand side where we can see different indicators. And youth, so that's male youth unemployment total, that looks percentage of total labor force for ages 15 to 24. That looks pretty good. So we click on that. We're already there. And here is the table. And now what you really want, what these institutions often do, is they present you with a little snapshot of the data and sort of the most recent year. But often they will also allow you to download the entire spreadsheet. So here's a download section, and we'll download the CSV file. Okay, CSV stands for comma separated values. That's a type of Excel spreadsheet, a simple Excel spreadsheet. So this has been downloaded. I can go in my download folder. It's here, and you see that this is actually a zip file. You double click on it, you can see what's inside, and there's some sort of metadata. You can look at them and see that can be of interest, but the data are actually here in that first spreadsheet. So let's open that first spreadsheet, and I get that over here. So what you now see is, and this is a very typical structure for the files in the World Bank database, you can see in the rows different countries, and then across the columns different years. Okay, and you see there are more data as we go later. And then you can see a column here with country abbreviations. and that can often be super useful. So Albania has country abbreviation ALB, and then there is also an indicator column. It tells you what we are looking at, what series we are looking at is unemployment youth total. Okay, so that's exactly what we want. And then and that is very important if you do serious data work or write essays, there's what's called an indicator code, right? And that means that this series, unemployment youth total, has a particular ID. Doesn't say a lot. UEM here stands for unemployment, but the other letters and numbers really have no sense. But this can be really important. This is like a social security number for a data set. Right? So if you write that down and use that, say, in a data appendix, then everyone will be able to find exactly the number which you want. If you just say youth unemployment, there may be different estimates. Okay, but this is exactly the data which you use. So that's very important to keep track of this. So we wanted to know which of these countries had the highest and lowest youth unemployment in 2019. So we're here in Excel. The way how I usually work here in Excel, if I just do once-off data queries, is I create a new tab. I copy this entire data tab across, going here. And now let's remove all the information we're not interested in. So we're not interested in all the years up until 2018, so we delete that. We're not interested in the years after, so we already have a much smaller problem. These 4 lines we don't need. So here we now have our data set, and you can see there are some countries for which we don't have information, like Aruba, Andorra, American Samoa, and so forth, but we have a bunch of countries. So we're going to sort these now. Highlight the data set, go to data, sort. We have headers here. So by which variable do we want to sort? By the 2019 column. We sort from smallest to largest. So, and here we go. Okay, 2019, we actually see that Qatar has the lowest youth unemployment rate. Perhaps we need to learn something about the scale of the data. So you see what this number, let's say here, Thailand, 4.19, that means there's a 4.19 of the youth labor force was unemployed. Okay, so these are percentage points. And the lowest number here is Qatar, which has 0.295. Okay, less than 0.5% of people in the age between 15 and 24 were unemployed in 2019. Cambodia also has a very low youth unemployment rate. It would be interesting to figure out what sort of policy they have in place to make that happen. Niger, the same. Okay, and you can see other countries with small unemployment rates. Then let's go to the end of the table to see the countries with highest unemployment rates. And you can see the highest unemployment rate, a staggering 76% in 2019, was Djibouti. Okay, South Africa also an incredibly high youth unemployment rate, 57%. So we have answered our first question. Which countries have the highest and lowest youth unemployment rates in 2019? We'll leave that spreadsheet here. We may look back at that spreadsheet when we see what ChatGPT gives us. In fact, let's do that right away. We open ChatGPT and we'll ask, in which country was the youth unemployment rate highest in 2019? Okay, we should get Djibouti. Let's see what we get. Okay, and indeed we get Djibouti. Okay, Djibouti, approximately 76%, exactly what we found. Okay, in Europe, it also tells us in Europe the highest rate was Greece, 40.4. Let's quickly see whether we have that as well. Well, Greece here, according to this data source, had a youth unemployment rate of around 35%. Okay, so not exactly the same information. Now, you have to be careful. There may be different sources of data, different ways of measuring the unemployment rate. So that is not necessarily wrong. It just tells you it's different. You can also see that ChatGPT here does give you sources. Okay, where to get that from. This is from Fred. That's an American database for data, or that Greece data comes from Wikipedia. Now, Wikipedia is not really a data source. You could check in Wikipedia where that information comes from. Okay, so don't say ChatGPT or Wikipedia is the data source. All right, so you need to dig down to who actually provides the data. So we could now also ask the question, which country was the youth unemployment rate lowest? Okay, was it lowest? Okay, so we would expect Qatar as an answer. Okay, so here we have some different information. The lowest youth unemployment rate appears to have been in South Korea. So ChatGPT is sort of hedging a little bit, saying it appears. Okay, it says 7.1%. Now let's check whether South Korea did have 7.1%. Let's find South Korea in here. It's not at 7.1%. So that's North Korea. Let's see. Perhaps need to search in the spreadsheet for. Okay, so to search, you press Control F, and let's search for Korea. Okay, we have Democratic People's Republic. That is North Korea. Korea the Republic, here we have 9.8. So it's a different number to what ChatGPT gave us, which is 7.1. Okay, again here we have as the source Wikipedia, and I'm not going to go in there. You can go in there and you can see where the information comes from. Wikipedia is usually pretty good in sort of referencing where information comes from, and again that could be due to sort of slightly different ways of measuring. Okay, but certainly what ChatGPT did not identify here is that we have some countries with much lower youth unemployment rates. Okay, now you may argue how all of these are measured in particular countries, but the World Bank data does indicate that there are lots of countries with significantly lower youth unemployment rate. So what did ChatGPT give us? Well, a mixed bag, I would say. Okay, the factual information seemed to be pretty correct, but in terms of the interpretation, which one was lowest, which one was highest, not so good. So let's go to the next question we want to answer. Let's say we want to have a time series of unemployment rate, and let's say total unemployment rate, meaning unemployment rate for everyone in a country, for the UK and for France. Okay, so the problem is not so much different here. And let's say we want to create a little time series plot for this. So we could think about, hey, the World Bank gave us youth unemployment data. Surely we'll be able to find sort of total unemployment rates as well, not only for youth. Let's see whether we can get that. Okay, let's delete the youth and let's say unemployment rate. Oh, what happened here? So unemployment total percent of labor force. That seems pretty good. That seems to be linked to a particular country here, but this one looks good. So let's see where we get with that. So On the right hand side, you can again see there's sort of different, again, same structure. We get a picture first and then sort of countries. Let's see what different series we have here. We are having female unemployment rate, male here total. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, let's click on that. Unemployment rate, total percent of the labor force. Now here it says national estimate. There is also one ILO estimate in the International Labour Organization estimate, where I try to sort of equalize the methodologies as far as possible. But let's just continue. Let's roll with this one. Again, you can see a table of all the countries, but we will again just download the data file, the CSV data file. We have that data file here. So it's this one here. You can see a UEM. We can already now make a little bit sense. Here you see UEM 15 to 24, and now we have UEM total. So let's look at that. Again, 3 files. The first one, the biggest file, will have the data. Same structure, countries in rows, years in columns. Okay, now we didn't want one particular year, but we want a time series for 2 countries. So let's apply the same strategy. We create a new tab and just copy across. Why do I copy that across? Well, in case I make a mistake, then I always can easily go back to the original data set here. Okay, so let's do that. We don't need these first 4 rows. Delete them. So now we need to delete almost all countries, but for France and the UK. So let's see if France will be somewhere here. So it's approximately alphabetically organized. It's alphabetic by the country code. Okay, now can we find the UK? So Great Britain is not, here, United Kingdom, GBR. Now United Kingdom, different organizations. I know there's a difference between United Kingdom and Great Britain. Sometimes you will find data for England, Scotland, Wales, although in international organizations, usually for the United Kingdom. So, okay, so these 3 countries, you certainly don't need all the countries before France. It's not in our task. We only want France and UK data, and all the data here we don't need. Okay, so now we have the data for France and the UK. We want the data, let's say, from 1991 onwards. And so we can delete all the data before. So we have data from 1991 to 2023. Okay, so now we want to create a line graph here. So we have data for 1 country in a row. Turns out, let me actually take these 3 pieces away as well. So we just have the country name and then the data. So turns out, if you, for instance, highlight these data here and you ask Excel to say insert a line graph, it does figure it out. Okay, you have a line graph here, and what you can see is at the x-axis doesn't have years really. You can change that by right mouse clicking into the graph, select data, and then horizontal category axis labels. You see it just says 1 to 34 so far, but we want the years ideally. Click on this edit, then you highlight all the years in your spreadsheet. Press OK. Okay, and now you have years on the x-axis. Everything's honky-dory. So that worked well. Turns actually out that let me delete this. In Excel, usually it is easier to work with time series data if you have one series across one column. So if these data were not organized in rows but in columns. That's a pretty easy way to do that in Excel. you highlight your data here and Control C, or in on a Mac Command C to copy, and you find a free space in your table, and now you paste special, transpose, and your data are now organized in columns. Now we can delete those, and you can again ask Excel to insert a line graph. Since you highlighted the entire column, it thinks there are many more data. You can see that here. So there's a couple of ways to do that. Just delete that for starters, and we just highlight not the entire column, but just the data as far as we have them. Again, go to insert, and here's our graph again, and you can again make sure that the years are at the horizontal axis in the same manner as before. Okay, so we highlighted this. We wanted a graph for the unemployment rate for France and the UK. Let's see what ChatGPT does with this request. Okay, so can you give me a time series graph with the total unemployment rates in the UK and in France from 2019 to 2023. Okay, you may want that for some essay you're writing. Let's see what ChatGPT produces. So in some sense, this is a pretty straightforward problem, because the data are very easily available, very common data, the unemployment rate, very clear instruction. So, oh, did I say 2019? Oh, I said 2019. I said we wanted actually 1991. So let me do that. So firstly, you can see we get the data. We don't actually get a graph. So let me do that again and just ask actually for 1991. Let's see what will be produced. So we basically get a table, and again, and it's sort of a fairly recent development. You get data sources. For France, it had trouble finding data for some years. Okay, and that's not really a useful graph here whatsoever. I don't even know. I don't think I understand what this is meant to do. But clearly it hasn't produced a graph. Now, that is a pretty difficult task for a large language model. I deliberately asked for something which I know ChatGPT has trouble producing. But let's actually at least check out the data. Let us do that like this and like this. Okay, let's compare a few data points. Let's look at the beginning, 1991. France, we had 9.134. Here we have 8.6. United Kingdom, 8.9. Here we have 8.55. I told you before that there are different ways to measure the unemployment rate. The data we have is on the basis of national institutions estimating it, and it may very well be here that you can actually see that here, World Bank data. You can see that it says modeled ILO estimate. So it actually accessed the other type of data which I mentioned before. So that's not a mistake. That's just using different data. You have to be aware of that, and you have to decide what you want. Let's go to the end. Okay, and you can see here the number again. We're having the first column is France, unemployment rate of 7.3%, here 7.34%. And the UK 4, and here 3.98. So very, very similar. But what you can see here, interestingly, is that ChatGPT collected the data from different sources. Okay, and that's really not ideal. That's not what you want. when you want to produce a time series graph, knowing that there are potentially different definitions, you really want to stick to the same data source. So again, in some sense, accurate information, but not exactly what we wanted, is what you get from ChatGPT. So let's go to perhaps the most challenging problem. We're going to ask something much less usual than unemployment rates. Here's the question I want to ask, and let's actually perhaps start this time with ChatGPT. So we ask something new here, and let me just copy the question. I'm going to start with a statement, and we're going to ask ChatGPT whether it's true or not. So let's put that in here. Let's make that a bit bigger and move here. So here's the statement. In Sweden, males do just as much care and housework, which is unpaid care work for personal and household work. In the UK, however, women do twice as much as men. So let's say, ask ChatGPT, is this statement correct? Okay, we'll put that in inverted commas so it knows exactly what we're asking. And let's see, let me just do that. So this is a much more challenging question, because measuring how much housework is being done is a much less standardized problem than measuring unemployment rates, which is routinely done by statistical agencies. So what do we get? So Sweden does not achieve equal distribution. We'll see that is correct in a moment. Okay. Sweden has the smallest gaps globally, about 3.3 hours per day difference between women's and men's unpaid care domestic workers. I don't think that's correct. It's less than 3.3 hours. I have a suspicion where the 3.3 comes from. We'll see that in a moment. If I'm right, it's not hours. So while Sweden is well ahead of many countries in narrowing the imbalance, men do not just as much as women. So what about the Great Britain? Official time use surveys by the ONS show women spent about 3.5 hours per day compared to men's 2 hours and 43 minutes, a gap of roughly 54 minutes per day, not a 2:1 ratio or double. Okay, so let's go back here. So we can already see something isn't quite right here. Here it says Sweden has the smallest gap, the gap being 3.3 hours per day, and then we're being told that the gap in the UK is 54 minutes per day. So that doesn't quite work. Okay, this is most likely correct. The difference 54 minutes, and the gap is not more than 3 hours in Sweden. But you can see this is already very murky here. And but one interesting bit of information here is I want to point out. Here it says official time use surveys. So this is basically where these sort of data come from, that in different countries there are what are called time use surveys. Basically a sample of people is being asked to very precisely document what they spent their time on during perhaps a particular day or during a week, and then this information is aggregated across the sample and then compared. That's where these data come from. But these sort of surveys are typically not done every year in every country. Or perhaps they are done, but this question may not be able to be answered. So let's see whether we can find some data somewhere. Okay. So actually, we haven't looked at everything here. That may be worth looking at this. So we already said this information here is incorrect for Sweden. Why the statement is inaccurate? So ChatGPT, I haven't seen that before. Okay, ChatGPT itself seems to think that something isn't quite right. So Sweden, the gender gap in unpaid care is small but real. not fully even. I don't even understand what ChatGPT wants to say here. UK, the imbalance is substantial, but not double. Number in figures over time. So I'll be very happy to give precise numbers. So let's use our traditional way again and see where can we perhaps find actual data. So let's go to Google. I don't know where to find these data. Okay, I need to sort of look for data myself. So I need to search. Okay, so I could look for data. I actually looked at that before. Okay, so what I looked for was, for instance, data on unpaid care and housework. And we can then sort of see what we get. Let me increase the font here a little bit. So here we see, and now we need to judge a little bit where we may find information. So here we see information from the Office for National Statistics. That's in the UK. Right? Well, unlikely we may very well find the UK data from here, and that may be the source where ChatGPT got the data from before. But we'll not find data for Sweden here. Now, UN Women Data Hub, that's something more interesting. UN, international institution, Women Data Hub, so it's a subsection of the UN webpage, things especially for women. So that may be interesting here. Let's go here. So let's see where that link gets us to. So explore the data. Yeah, we may want to do that. And now, you know, when you get to this for the first time, so I've seen that page before, we also looked for it, but you just have to look around. So any data sources, scroll around what we have. You're not sure where to begin. And actually, it turns out that here it gives us exactly what we want. Gender equality, proportion of time spent on unpaid domestic care work by sex, age, and location. I think that's pretty close to what we want. So let's look at this. So, and here you again, you know, we get maps. International institutions love maps and displaying data in maps, and that's really cool. But you can see here for 2023, there just don't seem to be all that much information. Now let's look. Usually you can find some spreadsheet somewhere, and yeah, we can find that here. It's a link to a spreadsheet. Let's look at the spreadsheet, and now you can see. Again, same sort of structure, different countries, different in rows, different years across columns. So let's just see where we can find Sweden and Great Britain. So where does Great Britain, United Kingdom. So let's start with Great Britain, United Kingdom. Oh, you can see here we only have female data, so we need male data as well. So often here on the left-hand side, you can make choices. And here, for instance, yeah, we also want male data. Give us the male data too. So let's find the UK again. UK here. Male and female data. So you can see, for instance, in 2001, you can see that the ratio was almost 2:1. Okay, so these are percentage. Actually, let's look at proportion of time spent on unpaid domestic work. Time spent out of 24 hours. Okay. So females spend 15%, male 8%. That's almost a ratio of 2:1. But let's see whether there's more recent data. And you see we don't have data for every year. 2015 was, let's say, let's make that 13:7. So that's less than a ratio of 1.5, perhaps 1.4. And then for 22, we have 16 over 12.3. That's about a ratio of 1.25. Okay, so females spend more, but not double more. Okay, 1.25 here. So what about Sweden? Here we got Sweden. Okay, so let's start again at the beginning. What we have here, so Sweden. So the earliest data here is 2011, 16, 12.8. So that's about the same ratio as the UK in the latest observation. Okay, so around 1.25. And do we have more data? No, from this source we don't have more data. Right? So from this source we would say actually in both countries it seems to be 1.25, but that information is from 2022 in the UK and from 2011 in Sweden. Okay, so we're having two different decades. Unfortunately, this source doesn't give us more detailed information. Okay, I know there are other sources which have sort of slightly more complete data, but that's perhaps enough for now. And now out to the last, how come ChatGPT thought that Swedish women did 3.3 hours a day more work? Now here you see these numbers. The difference between 16 and 12.8 is approximately 3.3. It's actually 3.2. So I suspect ChatGPT misinterprets this number and interprets this as hours rather than as percentage points. There you go. Thank you very much for looking at this. This sort of stuff's super interesting, can be tedious finding these data, but I hope this video gave you a little bit of an idea of how we go about finding data, and also made you understand that you cannot trust the numbers which ChatGPT or our other large language models give without verifying them at the source.